In the Indian texts, right, we have this concept of rhythm, right, which we had discussed last time as well. Yes. And when we talk about rhythm, one thing that comes to mind, which we have to address when we're talking about entropy, entropy can be discussed in terms of disorder, right, but it also can be discussed in terms of randomness, right, or in terms of the distribution of microstates, as it is called, right, in the thermodynamics perspective, right. So when we have randomness inherently requires some element of unpredictability, right? Unpredictability. And in that, when we look at the Indian knowledge systems, we have this element of Daiva, right? Which is the divine will, right? So there is Daiva, and Daiva has, it is not predictable. It is often even opaque to those who are not seekers or who don't believe in it, basically. And that leads to a lot of confusion as to why we are doing things in the way we are, right? There is a question often that if the final aim is to kind of, move towards Brahman consciousness, right? And there isn't an overarching meaning of life as we know it, right? Why do we do what we do, right? So Sri Krishna beautifully tells us in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita that we have to act without an attachment to the results. Right? That is because, I mean, as we say in English, man proposes and God disposes, right? So there are times when we think that we have a certain control of sorts, right? And we have a certain decentralized agency, right? But that is not always the case, right? That is something which is superseded by, in the Astika traditions, right? We talk about Daiva, which is the divine will, so to say, right? So that is a very interesting way in which randomness at our level, right, is superseded by a, it's almost like a hidden variable theory. In quantum mechanics, we used to talk about that, where there is a deterministic way of thinking, right? There is an ordered way of thinking, but there are some variables, right, which we do not have control over. We do not even have access to, right? That is why we see that as not ordered, sorry. Right. That has an element of chance, therefore, right? So this unpredictability aspect is very important, right?
That's the very nature of life also,
right? Absolutely.
Like the micro changes, the entropy,
absolutely,
within the universe, a closed system within the universe,
absolutely.
And that's why this energy we are getting from sun,
right. And in fact, every element of movement or evolution, right, and even in the quantum mechanics, there is this element of measurement. If every such act or event has a non-trivial effect on the system itself and things that are around it also. The idea of entropy itself, right? When we spoke about it in the 19th century, let's say, or afterwards, in the initial parts, we spoke about it in terms of disorder, in terms of thermodynamic aspects of things. But now we have come further, right? When von Neumann entropy is talked about, or Shannon entropy is talked about, in quantum, in computer sciences as well, we speak about the microstates, the different kinds of states of the system, which lead to a definition of entropy in terms of the microstates themselves.
And also, right? Analogous to information.
Right? So, so if there are more number of microstates, that would inherently mean there is more information in the system, essentially, right? So you see, there is a connection of the heat, the thermodynamics, with the information side of things, right? Now, it's very interesting because in Advait Vedanta, we speak about heat and energy, right, as something which is immanent. But underlying it is a more fundamental level of consciousness, right? So now I think last time we discussed about a little bit on consciousness itself, and there are some theories which try to posit that integrated information is consciousness, right? So there is the Tononi's integrated information theory, which is a very promoted theory in the Western context. But I would say that that is not a theory that quite does justice to the idea of consciousness in the in Indian context, in the Bharatiya Gyan Parampara, because the integrated information theory is emergent. It is something that is coming from a underlying reality. It is building up on that. So there is information of a system. How do you integrate the information? That leads to consciousness is the hypothesis of this theory. Right? Whereas in the Bharatiya Gyan Parampara, consciousness is fundamental. Right? It is what is underlying everything that we see around us. Right? Now, defining it, firstly, the Vedantin would say you cannot even define it. Right? There's no, it's a pointless,
it only
futile
forms like you explained in the previous gunas.
Right. And gunas, and that is also a qualified form, right? When you talk about the pure consciousness, there is no way to articulate it actually, right? So that is what the Vedantin would say. So if we say that the heat aspect going to information by the Landau principle, or vice versa, is a connection to Vedantin aspect of heat subsuming into consciousness, I don't think that translation is quite there, right? It's not logically, or if we are consistent with the traditions, it's not something we should be speaking about in that way. But it definitely shows that there's an underlying reality of this heat aspect, right? It could be information, it could be consciousness, right? Which is also being brought forth in modern physics as such.